You want your dessert? I got brownies.
When I went on the initial interview for Leave It to Beaver, it was kind of interesting. It was what they call a cattle call, and so there were. I think they said they interviewed in New York and Los Angeles, and there was over 5,000 people on the interviews. And we just kept going back and back and back, and every time they'd line you up with different people and say, okay, you have the same color eyes or the same color hair, you're the right size, because what they wanted was two brothers and their friends, so it was a huge interview. And we kept going back and back, and it wasn't that I was tired of it, but it really wasn't anything that, the going on interviews was something I did a lot. And I had just joined the Cub Scouts, actually, of the American Boy Scouts, and so that was the very first. The entry level position was the Cub Scouts, and I was going to have my first meeting, and my mom came and said, "Oh, you know what, Joe? We have another interview for that TV series." And I said, "But Mom, I've got my first Cub Scout meeting today." And my mom went, and I'm the kind of person that always likes to be on time, but she said, "You know what? The Cub Scout meeting isn't till." Maybe I think it was but an hour and a half after school, so that if you wear your uniform, we can go to the studio. It won't be like the massive interview because they're down to the last maybe 8 or 9 kids, so that's only maybe 5 groups. So it won't take very long, and they just want to see you. You can wear your uniform, and then you can go to the Cub Scout meeting. So I said, well, okay. But you know how that kind of thing goes. We got there, and of course, they took all the other kids. And when they finally called me, I knew that I was probably going to be late for my Cub Scout meeting. So I walked in, and the producers had a lot of kids of their own, and they had gotten to know me a little bit, and they could see that I was kind of jittery. And they said, "Gee, Jerry, what's the matter?" And I said, "Well, you know what? I've got a Cub Scout meeting, and I'm going to be late for it." And they said, "Well, don't you want to be here?" I said, "No." And they said, "Okay, you can go." And so I pretty much, the other kids had been in there like 15 and 20 minutes for this final interview, and I pretty much walked right in and walked right out. And my mom looked at me and said, "Jerry, what happened?" And I said, "Well, they asked me if I wanted to be here," and I said no, and so they said I could go. And my mom said, "That probably wasn't the best idea, but, whatever, it's a little late now." And they actually called that night and said I had the job because they really would rather have a kid that wanted to go to a Cub Scout meeting than be an actor. So that's how I got the job on Leave It to Beaver. The pilot is very, very hazy. I mean, it was only, I think, probably 3 or 4 days. We went in and we filmed it. Barbara Billingsley and myself were the only people on the original show.
The first time I met Joe Conley and Bob Mosher, I was called to see them about another pilot. And they later, about 6 months later, called me and wanted me to go over to the studio to meet them. And they handed me a script. And they said, "We're going to make a pilot." And the pilot was Leave It to Beaver.
When we did the original pilot for Leave It to Beaver, it was called It's a Small World. And they really didn't like that name because it didn't really convey what they wanted to say about the show. So what they did is they then named it Wally and the Beaver, and they thought that sounded too much like an animal show. So then they changed the name to Leave It to Beaver. Where they came up with that, I'll never know. We did the original pilot, and it took quite a while to sell. I think it was at least 8 or 9 months, maybe even a year or more. And when we came back to do the really first episodes of Leave It to Beaver, the original Wally had grown to be over 6 feet. And so they went, he really was a big brother, a big, big brother. So that's when they went out and found Tony Dow.
Well, the part on Leave It to Beaver came just kind of out of the blue. We were moving to Hawaii. My mom had gone to Hawaii, loved it. And there was this television show where they were replacing the older son and the father. And, Jerry and Barbara were in it, and they'd already auditioned thousands of kids. But strangely enough, this guy, Harry Ackerman, who was the executive producer on Johnny Wildlife, turned out to be one of the executive producers that Joe Conley and Bob Mosher brought in for Leave It to Beaver. And he said, "Hey, I work with this kid that might be okay. Why don't we take a look at him?" I went in, and that's how it sort of started.
They recast the parts, and Max Showalter had played Ward Cleaver, and they hired Hugh Beaumont.
I had worked with Hugh Beaumont before. I had done a television show, and it was about Christmas, and I was in an orphanage. I guess I played a lot of orphans. I don't know why, but anyway, somebody had stolen all the orphans' toys, and I was sitting on a bench, and Hugh Beaumont was supposed to come up to me, and we were going to talk, and of course, it worked out fine. The orphans did get all their presents, but Hugh Beaumont said to me, you know, in this scene, you're supposed to be crying. Can you cry on cue? And I kind of thought about it and said, well, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, let me tell you a little trick of acting that I know. He said, when they want you to cry, just put your hands over your face and laugh. And he said, that will make it sound like you're crying. And you know what? It worked. And I saw that, and it really did look like I was crying. So Hugh Beaumont actually taught me one of my first acting lessons, which was how to cry. But then when he came on the interview, there were about 5 or 6 fathers on the interview. And so I went home that night and just prayed and prayed and prayed because I thought he was just the greatest man ever. And he actually got the part.
And we just started the show with this new cast.
Thank you, dear. Oh, no dessert, Beaver?
No.
No what?
No, I won't have any.
You have a new teacher, Miss Canfield. What's she like?
All right, I guess.
What happened at school today?
She'd call me Theodore.
The TV Guide a few years ago did the 50 greatest characters in television, and one of them was the Beaver, and Eddie Haskell was in there as well. I'm trying to remember, as they said, something to the effect of, you know, that the character more than the actor remains so strong because he was able to reflect all that we questioned about ourselves. Where do I fit in? How do I accept my looks? How do I fit into a classroom, into a family? How do I do with girls? That Jerry's reflections, even at a young age, were so honest.
You look different than you do in school. Do I? Yeah. I guess it's because you're dirtier.
He'd been in the business so long, and instinctively, he never made a mistake in terms of jokes, dialogue. I mean, it was like he knew how to hit every line perfectly, which, you know, I didn't know how to do. I mean, I had to be coached for quite a while, and so it was always amazing to me how good he was. I think he was the best kid actor of that era, of all the kids on television. I think he was the best.
I think I lost my money.
Looks like you found it. Everything else in town.
Can you give me a haircut anyways? I've got to be an angel in school.
Jerry couldn't read a line badly, no matter what you did with him. It wasn't until he got older he got a little self-conscious, but boy, when that kid started, he was just wonderful.
People say that I never missed a line. I missed so many lines that was incredible. One of the things about my working as an actor, how I learned to memorize things so well, is I'm dyslexic. And when I was starting to learn how to read, I found that when I read something and what was actually on the written page, it would be slightly different. So when I started school and was reading or reading aloud to anybody, it always was different. And I was afraid that people would laugh at me and say, oh no, that's wrong, because I always hated to be wrong. So at night, my mother would read me different things that I had to read out loud, and I memorized it. But when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, a lot of times I would read the script or my mother would read it to me. And so what I was really saying was the way I would speak it, not necessarily the way it was written. The writers, when we did the table reading on Monday, would listen. And if it sounded better the way I said it and meant the exact same thing, they felt that was better. So it was much easier for me to memorize. Now as an adult actor, I know when I go in to memorize a script, there are always difficult words or things that, you know, the writer wanted said this way, and it's much, much harder to memorize it than when you can just basically look at something and say, okay, this is what they meant to say in child speak, and then speak it.
Hey, Wally, how come you're taking Caroline to the dance now?
Well, gee, 'cause Eddie's my best friend.
Oh, I thought that was the reason you couldn't go with it before.
Well, it was then, but it isn't now.
You know, Wally, things were a lot easier to understand when you didn't know any girls.
I've read that Wally Cleaver was the simplest character in the history of television. A decent, supportive guy who really cared about his brother and was someone who was going places. That Wally was a star athlete, that Wally dated the best looking girls, that Wally got good grades. When Beaver would come in and be upset about something, where was Wally? Usually at the desk, doing his homework.
He was the ideal big brother. I mean, he was an athlete. Just on the show, they always had him being the perfect big brother. Tony Dow was an athlete. He's also very creative. He's an artist. He does sculpturing and artwork. So he was actually the perfect big brother, someone you could really look up to.
You know, Wally, sometimes you're a real neat brother.
He was just a good guy, and that's why we still like him. That's why we've always liked him. You could trust him. You could tell him a secret and know that he wasn't going to spill the beans on you.
Now, why didn't you tell us?
Well, gee, Mom, I couldn't squeal on my own brother. If I started doing that, well, he could tell a whole bunch of bad stuff on me.
Barbara Billingsley was absolutely a fabulous person. She's the all-American mom. In fact, when we were doing Leave It to Beaver, she started out like most people of that time as a smoker. And she said, you know what? If I'm going to be the ideal mom, I better quit smoking. And so she actually gave it up. I think it was the first or the second year of the show, and never smoked again, just because she wanted to be the ideal mom.
I was embarrassed that people would come on our set and see June Cleaver smoking, so I gave it up. And that I never smoked. That's the end of it. It wasn't hard to stop. You know, if you don't say, I have to stop, I can't have another, you can't do anything like that. You just have to say, I'll have one later. Put it off. Just keep putting it off. That's what I did. Nobody even knew I'd stopped.
Barbara Billingsley is one of the most lovely human beings on earth. She's just sweet, she's gorgeous, she's thoughtful. We're pretty close friends. We go out to dinner every couple months. And I think that she's about as lovely as they get. She's even more lovely than June Cleaver was.
I just became June Cleaver, too. And you ask my sons, and they'll say, we don't know where June Cleaver starts and Mom starts. It's all mixed up. So I guess a lot of me went into that character.
Anything wrong?
I want to ask you something.
Yes.
When do I get to be grown up?
Well, you're growing, but, well, I'd take a little while before you're really grown up.
People always, though, ask about, you know, why was she always so dressed up?
Everybody asks me that. The pearls I wear because I have a hollow in my neck.
Barbara Billingsley was a very, very skinny New York model. And when they went to film her, the two muscles in her neck right here caused a shadow.
It was very difficult to photograph. We didn't have as good of cameras. We didn't have as good a film.
With another person, they may be able to put more light on it and make the shadow go away. But because she was blonde, it would make highlights in her hair that just didn't look very good. So they needed a piece of jewelry that would cut right across that part of her neck that she could wear all the time. So they thought, well, what could we do? Oh, we'll give her pearls. And of course, when you vacuum with pearls on, you have to wear an apron and high heels.
And the high heels, for pity's sakes, I used flat shoes when the kids were little, and as the darn kids grew, they put me in high heels so I'd stay taller.
I always looked at Barbara as, you know, the beautiful blonde, because that's what she was. She was always impeccably dressed. She was always had the best manners. One of the things that she would always do to me that's kind of embarrassing, I guess I was a little rambunctious. And whenever I would come to a door, at a studio, there's always a lot of things that could fall, or at least I'll say that, or that when you walk through, especially a set door, something might be on the other side. So if Barbara and I were walking together, I would sometimes walk in front of her, and she would grab me by the little hairs back here in the back of the neck and pull me back and go, remember your manners, ladies always go first. And I didn't learn real quick, so I had the back of my hair pulled quite a bit by Barbara Billingsley. But you know what? I always let ladies go through the door first now.
Well, and I'll carry your books, too. They're kind of heavy, and you might get a Charlie horse or something.
all this warmth that she brought to this role. And here, people criticize, oh, she was a housewife. In real life, here was a woman who was a widow raising 2 boys, and she's been independent and very different. A working mom when there weren't working moms.
I used to get such a kick out of the young reporters from various papers or magazines who used to interview me, and they'd forget I was working. And they would talk to me as though, working for women was a brand new thing. And I'd say, what do you think I'm doing?
Honey, it doesn't hurt any man to see what prices are now and then.
Hey, that was a real revelation. The last time I bought coffee, it was 35 cents a pound.
Oh? Is that what you and Grover Cleveland Alexander paid for it?
All right. What's this?
Frozen waffles. You just heat them and serve them.
Wonder whatever happened to all the sweet gray-haired old ladies in aprons who used to work all day in the kitchen.
They're posing for the labels on all the frozen food packages.
Hugh Beaumont was a very, very interesting person. He actually wasn't really an actor. He started out as a Methodist minister. He graduated from USC in 1949 and asked to be put into a very, very poor congregation. And, of course, when you do that as a minister, you get your wish. He was married at the time. But then he started having kids. He had 3 kids, and he needed to find some sort of an income that he could supplement it because the parish was absolutely too poor to be able to support him. So he became an actor, and he worked with Errol Flynn and Ronald Reagan and did some early TV. He was probably best known for a character that he did called Michael Shane. Now, Michael Shane was a very, very hard-drinking, smoking, San Francisco detective. In fact, if you didn't give Michael Shane the answer he was looking for, he'd lift you up by the lapels and pretty much threaten you. And so I don't think that's really what a minister wanted to be known for. So then when he got Leave It to Beaver and could take the boys into the den and have a nice little talk with them, I think he really hit his stride.
Well, I'm very sorry, boys, but this time I'm really going to have to punish you. Beaver, it would have been very easy for me to forgive you if you had just stood up and said, Dad, I lost my money and Wally gave me the haircut.
Dad, I lost the money and Wally gave me the haircut.
Oh, Hugh was great. In the beginning, he used to say, come on, let's get this over with and get on with something else. He really didn't have an appreciation of what we were doing. And I was so happy, he finally called me Pollyanna. Then we got along. We just got along beautifully after that.
I think probably Hugh Beaumont was an excellent father. I've met his kids, and he was a very, very nice man.
The thing about television is you really can't hide who you are. You can act, but the thing about TV is that when it's your face this big in everybody's living room, it becomes impossible to hide or lie.
Well.
Ward?
Hmm?
Forgetting something?
Oh, that Ferguson report. Yeah. Fine.
But the unfortunate part about it, he didn't get to live to see the success of Beaver all these years later.
I remember after the first or second year, he was ready to move on and, go back to his movie career. He didn't realize how long his portrait of the American dad would last and how everybody would really consider him the epitome of a father.
Look at it this way, Beaver. If you have something your friends don't have, you don't take advantage of them. You share the thing with them.
He was actually, during World War II, a conscientious objector. And he was in the medics. He did serve in the service, but he wouldn't actually be on the front lines. But when we were doing a lot of shows about Beaver learning to defend himself, and there is one where Beaver comes home with a black eye, and Ward is going to teach him how to fight. But when we were actually doing the scene, Hugh was going, or Ward was saying, okay, Beaver, make a fist. Now, at that time, I didn't really know about boxing, and so I would put my thumb in like this, because I figured, gee, if it's out like that, if you hit somebody, it might pull back. But if it's in here, it'll be, like brass knuckles or coins in there. And Hugh Beaumont said, no, 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 no. That's not the way to fight. Put your fist out like this, put your thumb here, because if you put it in there, it'll break the first time you hit anybody. And years later, I started thinking to myself, Hugh Beaumont was a very, very tough person. I mean, you don't find out about putting your thumb in there and breaking it unless you know something about fighting. He chose not to fight, but as I say, he was a great outdoorsman, knew all about hunting and fishing. So even though he chose not to kill people as a conscientious objector, he really did know everything about fighting.
I don't want you to go around picking fights. But if you should happen to run into this kid again who gave you the black eye the other day, well, you're not gonna, you wouldn't want to let someone push you around twice in a row, now would you?
No, sir.
You know, I never really was confused between the family on Leave It to Beaver and my own family. I know a lot of people say that. They say, you know, did you feel like that was your real family? Well, no, I knew that, you know, I was the oldest in my family. Actually, Tony Dow had an older brother, so he was the youngest. So we were, you know, that was totally different. But I knew that Barbara had 2 sons. I knew that Hugh had 3 kids, and we would go there every day, and we would work together. And it was, you know, a wonderful relationship. But it was more like people that were your really best friends that you saw every day.
Get away, Beaver! I'll slug you. What else are you moving in, Eddie?
Nothing but junk. Boy, are you gonna have creepy neighbors.
I think they wanted a wise-ass character. Bob Mosher Jr. once gave us a picture of a friend of his who his father obviously didn't like too much. And the picture was of the kid sitting at the kitchen table. They were playing cards. He was wearing a T-shirt. He had a pack of cigarettes and tucked in his sleeve. And he had this glare, kind of, hey, I'm cool aura about him. And you could just read it. And I said, guys, that's where Eddie Haskell came from.
Good morning, Mrs. Cleaver. That's a very pretty dress.
Thank you.
And they found Ken Osmond, who was a kid actor and a dancer, and somehow he embodied this evil Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder who was always telling you to do the wrong things. And you know, he'd do terrible things and was, you know, thought of as a genius by kids because he looks at Beaver's D- on his report card and he says, hey, I can fix this, Sam.
We're gonna change the mark. All it takes is just 2 little lines.
Boy, Eddie, you're a genius.
Ah.
What good is it raising his mark?
Well, don't you see? He'll go around telling his parents and everybody that he got a B+. Then when they find out his real mark, pow, they'll clobber him.
That'll teach him to get an A in citizenship.
Well, I think that at the time, Kenny Osmond did have some Eddie Haskell in him. I think at this point in time, it's really interesting because I think that he was one of the truly, really good television actors. You know, like the Fonz, he created a character that everybody will remember forever. I mean, I think it's one of the top half dozen characters ever on television. And it isn't easy to do that. And, you know, I think that he's got a real talent.
He's probably the most diametrically opposed to his character as anyone on the show. Ken Osmond, when he finished doing the show, went on to become a Los Angeles police officer. He was a motorcycle cop, and he was working in a part of town that literally I wouldn't walk around in during the day. And after 5 and 6 and 8 years, I said, Kenny, let the young guys go in there. And he kept saying, nope, this is my community. Someone's got to be down there. It might as well be me. Well, after 18 years, he was shot in the line of duty. He's on disability retirement. They wanted him to go to a desk job, and Kenny said, no, I'm a street cop. If you don't put me on the street, just retire me. So, as I say, he's definitely a police hero and someone that everyone can look up to, and not anything like Eddie Haskell.
Hey, Eddie. You know Kathleen Hartzer?
Yeah, I know Kathleen Hartzer.
What do you think would happen if I asked her for a date?
She'd burst out laughing.
Oh, come on, Eddie. I'm not kidding.
Neither am I.
Buggy was a wonderful creation. You know, Wally didn't have, you know, like the devil and angel on his shoulders. He had the devil and Eddie Haskell whispering one thing in his ear, and on the other side, he had this big sloth who was unreliable, who was a liar, a suck-up to parents, but not Eddie, but much more transparent than Eddie. Lump is, hi, Miss Cleaver. Yeah, you look nice today. Yes, thank you, Lumpy. You couldn't trust anything he did. or said. And originally he was portrayed as a bully, and really, a nemesis of Beaver.
I thought I told you guys not to go home this way.
We can go home anywhere we want to. Get out of the way, Lumpy.
Don't call me Lumpy. My name is Rutherford.
All the big kids call you Lumpy Lumpy.
And the best part of this was that Lumpy's father, Fred Rutherford, played by Richard Deacon, was Ward's associate at work, and you kind of got the feeling maybe his boss. So you kind of had to be nice to him.
Frank Bank, who played Lumpy, and a lot of times we call him Dumpy Lumpy, is the character that everyone looks at and says, oh my gosh, look at that guy. He's just so stupid. Well, Frank Bank is one of the leading stocks and bonds dealers here in Los Angeles. He has some of the biggest clients, and he has, I think he has 2 degrees. He has a master in economics and business from UCLA. So Dumpy Lumpy really isn't so dumpy anymore.
Let's see, I'll take,
What's the matter, Wally? Can't you see me?
yeah, Lumpy, but I can't see anybody else.
He wasn't in as many episodes as Eddie or some of Beaver's friends, but is still, the strength of the character and his performance just put him up there with the big 5.
Look, kid, I want that watch. My father ever finds out, you'll be in big trouble.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you stole it. You want me to go to the police? Listen, I'll give you 48 hours to give me back my watch, or else. 48 hours.
All of Beaver's friends were written from the same palette. They were generally users, dishonest, that they would lead him astray. All of it, Richard, Larry, Mondello, Whitey Whitney, Gilbert Bates. Oh, these are terrible people. I mean, I don't know how they ever let him hang out with these kids.
Why were you talking to Linda Dennison if she's not your girl? I wasn't talking to her because she was a girl. I was talking to her like she was a people. Well, are we going to dig that hole, aren't we? Sure, Beaver. Hey, Whitey, let's use up sides and play dolls. Yeah. You guys, cut that out.
We had a lot of really top act. I mean, Edgar Buchanan played Captain Jack, which was the first show. Jimmy Gleason, who was a character actor for a long time. Madge Kennedy was on the show. Floyd the Barber from the Andy Griffith Show, he was on our show. He was our barber, too. Who else? Tim Matheson played one of the guys. Jimmy Hawkins was on the show. And Ryan O'Neal was on the show. Ryan was a friend of mine a little bit. He had come to a Christmas party. My folks had Christmas parties every year. And he had come with a friend of ours, daughter. And we talked a little bit, and he was saying, yeah, he was trying to be an actor, et cetera, et cetera. Well, a couple months later, I saw him walking down the street at Universal. I said, hey, what are you doing? He said, oh, I just went in and read for a part on your show. I said, no kidding. So I went over and I walked in. I said, well, how do you do? Because he's a friend of mine. It'd be great if you give him the part. I don't know if they listened to me, but they did give him the part. So that, I think, was the first thing that Ryan O'Neal, or at least one of the first things he had done.
Well, hiya, Wally. I didn't expect you so soon.
Well, we got here at 3 minutes after 7.
Where are the girls?
I think they're in the kitchen there.
How do you like the place, Wally?
It's swell, Tom.
You got to say, 50 years, what makes it so special? The warmth is unique, the humor was unique, and it was wise, and not ashamed of being wise or being sentimental or showing the faults of parents and kids. They weren't doing a sitcom. They were doing these smaller morality plays.
Certainly it isn't my fault.
It certainly is.
No man has ever tried harder to be a buddy to... What did you say?
It certainly is your fault and mine. Why, don't you realize what a spot we put him on?
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Put yourself in his place. He loses his lunch money 3 days in a row, and then after being warned that this is his last chance, he loses his haircut money. Naturally, he's afraid to tell us.
What's so natural about it? Are we monsters? Do we hit him? Do we beat him?
Ward, the only guide a little fellow has is the love and approval of his parents. Now, if he thinks he's lost that, it's worse than a beating.
The production, I think it was beautifully and simply photographed. The way it was scored was more emotional than any other show. And the writing in particular, you know, I always responded to as a kid because it spoke to me that the boys' language sounded like my own. Their reticence to bathe, they didn't want to get dressed up. These are the things that you felt every week, every day.
Hey, Beaver, eat your peas.
Do I gotta?
Well, sure you gotta.
But I don't like the insides.
Well, then just eat the outsides and shut up.
I think the older I get, the more I realize how great the show really was.
People always say, well, who were the writers on Leave It to Beaver, and why were the writers so good? Conley and Mosier were the writers.
Joe Conley and Bob Mosier, all the way through, even though later they didn't write all the scripts, they were there supervising, changing, making it their work.
Joe Conley had always wanted to be a writer, and from the time he was, I guess, in his teens, he had kept a book, and he wrote down things that happened to him, but at the front of the book, he had a list of names, and of course, right off the bat, he got Tom, Dick, and Harry. But when he was in the Merchant Marines during World War II, one of his shipmates was named the Beaver, and so he put that name down. And when he came to do the show, he said, you know, we need a character name for this little boy. So he went through all the A's and, you know, didn't find anything, came to the B's, found Beaver, and said, that's the perfect name. So that's actually how I got the name of Beaver on Leave It to Beaver.
Theodore,
My name's Beaver.
Beaver? Is that your given name?
Yes, ma'am. My brother given it to me.
You got to realize that when television started, that it was owned, the shows were owned by ad agencies. The original sponsor of Leave It to Beaver was Remington. Used to make typewriters. They figured, show about the kids, you know, they'll type their reports, we'll run commercials, and everything will be great. You know, they were the bosses on the shows. When Leave It to Beaver first debuted on CBS in 1957, the executive producer was Harry Ackerman, who worked for an ad agency and was their nominal boss. But when the show was canceled after the 57-58 season and moved to ABC for its final 5 years, Mosier and Connolly had the power not to have someone from the J. Walter Thompson agency telling them what to do. They were the bosses. And it was people like them and Patty Chayefsky and Rod Serling from The Twilight Zone who made television a writer's medium. That the writers' words in television, thanks to people like Joe and Bob, were as strong as they were in the theater. You did not change them, you did not challenge the author. And it is because of their dominance as writer-producers that other writer-producers flourished and were able to bring their voices to the screen without interference.
You realize you can't keep a bicycle you won while you were being disobedient. We'll have to find something to do with the bike.
Larry and I already found something to do with it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I walked it back to Larry's house, and then Larry and I walked it down to a church.
To a church?
Yes, sir. Larry once saw him do it with babies in a movie.
Do what?
We left it on the front steps with a note. Well, I just hope someone nice adopts it.
When you see the structure that was imposed in the scenes, that Mosier and Connolly knew how to start a scene, how to complicate it, and how to push you to the next scene. And endings were very important because in Leave It to Beaver, the endings were sometimes very different, and that the problem might be solved, but then they'd often go further.
Dad?
Yes, Beaver?
I'm sorry I ran away.
Well, I'm sorry, too. You shouldn't have done that.
Mom said, when you were a kid, you ran away once. How did you feel when your father didn't come after you?
Well, I felt pretty bad.
Then how come you didn't come after me?
Well, I guess I made a mistake, Beaver. I guess I was so anxious to be right that I kind of forgot what it felt like when I was a little boy.
Esquire magazine several years ago asked many show creators, Carl Reiner from the Dick Van Dyke Show, Elliot Schoenman from the Cosby Show, and many others in between those eras, what was the best sitcom of all time? And there were many mentions of Mary Tyler Moore and MASH, but the one that was named the most was Leave It to Beaver.
Now look, Beav, I know what you told Miss Canfield, but just between us men, why didn't you go to the cafeteria for lunch?
Just between us men,
Uh-huh.
I wasn't hungry.
I think it's the family that everybody either has or would like to have. And they're real people, and they're written well, and they have honest writing. And I think that's why it's lasted.
They weren't just interested in telling the story, they were interested in the relationships between the characters and between kids and parents.
I always sort of slough off this kind of feeling that, Leave It to Beaver was a little stodgy because families don't live that way. Well, I think a lot of families did. Plus, we were trying to portray America in a favorable light. It was a Cold War was right about that time, and the Russians were putting up satellites and going to space before we were. So, it was important that America show that we have this solid sort of lifestyle. And I think that was part of Leave It to Beaver, although it wasn't an overriding part of it. But I do think that they were in a position where they wanted to express American family life in its best light, not unrealistically, but in its most favorable light.
Beaver, if we let people think you wrote the poem, we'll be dishonest. Don't you understand?
Yeah. I guess I did something bad. But I sure don't know what. All I did was go to bed when you told me to.
I've always gotten a kick out of it that Ward and I didn't have a bedroom. We just had a door. And if there was something going on in the house at night that we had to come out of our room, we'd come out tying our robes, putting our robes on. But we really didn't have a bedroom.
Ward?
Yeah?
Well, what's going on at this hour of the night?
Oh, I'll tell you. Beaver is outside, up a tree, and he's scared to come down.
Ah.
I think sitting around a dining room table every night and catching up on what the days brought is a great tradition. I would think that would be beneficial for every family in America. However, I think it's very difficult to work in because there's everybody's time is so scrambled and there's so much going on, and kids are, they got a soccer practice and volleyball practice or swim practice, and the father's got a late meeting and the mom's working too maybe sometimes, so it's a different time. People sometimes say, well, that wasn't real. I never sat down every night with my family. Well, a lot of families, I would say in that era, the late 50s, early 60s, that many, many, many families did. And in fact, Joe Connolly and Bob Mosier's families did. And as a matter of fact, Joe Connolly wore a tie to his dinner table. He was always in a tie. So there are people who live that way. There are people who live different ways, but there are other shows about those people.
We sure fooled them, didn't we, Wally?
Yeah, I guess we fooled them.
What's the matter?
Well, I'm not so sure we fooled them.
Gee, they didn't say anything.
Well, that's the way they are sometimes. They go along nice and easy and smiling, but all the while they're getting ready to jump on you.
Gee, sometimes Mom and Dad are pretty tricky, aren't they?
No, they're not being tricky. They're just trying to be fair. And that's what usually messes us up.
I think the reason that Leave It to Beaver is so believable and has such legs and people are still watching it is because every episode came from real life. I know today people that write comedy, most of the people that do comedy television are stand-up comedians, and it's basically set up, joke. And people will go into a room and one guy will say, this would be a funny thing to write about, and then they go to what they call their black boxes, and they have little index cards, and they say, well, I have a joke about this, and I have a joke about that, and this, and each person has a joke about whatever they're going to write about that week, and then, they get laughs, and they're delivered as stand-up. With Connolly and Mosier, it was totally different. Each show was based upon something that happened to them or their kids.
They never looked for laughs. They never looked for jokes. They never did a setup and then a punchline. They always let the humor grow out of the situation. And the situations were all real because they had so many kids. Joe Connolly had 9 kids, or did he have 7? I don't know. And Bob had 2.
So they had a lot of material for the show. They had 9 children between them. So, and all of our shows were based on facts.
Rich Carell, Richard Rickover in Beaver, always used to tell me that when he'd go out with Joe's family, or they go to Disneyland or something, their parents were close, that if someone said something, as if someone inverted the letters and Roman numerals became Nomen Ruminals, out would come a little book from the back of Joe's pocket, and he'd jot that down.
When we go on a picnic, we eat hot dogs and hamburglers.
Hamburglers?
He means hamburgers, Miss Canfield. Beaver always talks that way.
Oh.
Not one was a made-up story. It was based on some kernel of truth. And that's why I think they're so good.
And a lot of people that are watching it now will tell me, you know what? That exact same thing happened to me. That's why that one's my favorite episode. And I'm always thinking, well, that's because it's happened to a lot of guys.
Everybody grew up in a family. Everybody grew up and had friends like Eddie Haskell or Lumpy or Richard or Larry Mondello. Everybody knew somebody like that, so they could relate to it, and it affected their lives.
Hey, you want to eat at my house, Chester? I don't know. You want to eat at my house? Well, I don't know. What are you having? I don't know. Well, we'll call my house and find out what we're having, and then we'll decide. Oh, okay.
I think Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher were amazing guys, and I think Norm Tokar, because I spent a lot of time with him later in his life, he was a fascinating guy and a really talented director.
He was wonderful. Boy, he was the greatest with the kids, too. He was wonderful for comedy, and he was for Tony, who played Wally. Gosh, Tony wasn't an actor. Tony was an athlete and junior champion. And Norman was absolutely wonderful with him. And great with Jerry, too, but Jerry had experience.
He was interesting. He was probably about 5'4" or 5'5", and red-haired with big, thick glasses, big horn-rimmed black glasses, and he was just a great guy. I was always very impressed because for a while he was married to one of the Lois Lanes on Superman, and I can remember going over to his house and talking with him and saying, ooh, he's married to one of Superman's girlfriends. So he was always just a real character and a nice guy. The crew were my very, very favorite people. I did all sorts of fun things with them. You have to remember, there was about probably 100 people on the crew, and one of the things that they knew was that if Tony and I weren't happy, we wouldn't be giving the kind of performances that we were. And so they did all sorts of things. I know with one of the makeup men, Bob Don, I built a little boat. Now, I was walking around the studio, and I saw a little piece of pine. And I picked it up, and I thought, you know what? If I just drill a little hole in this, I could make a boat. And so then he started to carve it. And the next thing I know, he put like 5 pieces of pine together, and we took clamps and glued them, and it got fairly big. And then the prop man, Oscar, saw what we were doing, and he said, you know what? We could take it to the curtain department, and they could make a sail for it. And so the next thing, they made a huge sail for it. Then after that, they said, you know what? We could fiberglass it. It'd be a much better boat if it was fiberglassed. So they fiberglassed it. Well, you know what? When we took it to the lake to try it for the very first time, we didn't have enough ballast in it, and it rolled right over and just went like this. The worst part was that, you have to remember, back in these days, $300 and $400 was a whole lot of money. They got the bill from all the different departments, and they charged it to one of the shows, and it was about $500 for this boat that wouldn't even float. But it was a great time building it.
All set.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, ship ahoy!
One of the things that you learned working in Hollywood back in that time period was that all the people on the crew they were all professionals. They were all consummate professionals, and everybody worked very hard. So you got this work ethic about and a sort of a perfectionism, which I don't know if that's helped me or hasn't helped me or whatever. But those are the things that I remember that that quality was always really important, because I thought our show had a lot of quality, and everybody who worked on it was striving for quality. So I was kind of brought up in that kind of environment.
Well, I told you you'd get in trouble if you brought the ring to school.
Yeah. How come you always know stuff like that?
Well, I was your age once, and all the trouble you're getting in, well, I already got in.
The The first day I was on the set of Leave It to Beaver, we were shooting an episode called Captain Jack. And I don't remember being terrified, although I should have been. I mean, Jerry was an old pro. He was, you know, it was a piece of cake for him, and Hugh and Barbara had been in the business for a long time. But we were out on the back lot, and so it was just like a playland for me. It was like I was just fascinated by everything. I mean, I didn't know anything that was going on. I'd done Johnny Wildlife, so I had a little bit of an experience with, you know, the camera and the crew and how things worked. And I don't think that I had a problem. I had a big problem trying to act, though. I remember that. I think my acting was a little suspect in the first few shows.
Raise an Everglades alligator in your own home.
Express charges prepaid.
Live delivery guaranteed. No CODs.
Wally, we could keep him in the bathtub.
Well, okay, let's send for it. But an 8-foot alligator for only $2.50. There must be a catch to it.
But Wally, they wouldn't let him print Robot Men of Mars unless it was the truth.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
We were shooting the show where the kids get an alligator in the mail, and they keep it in the back of the toilet tank.
And that was going to be our very, very first episode of Leave It to Beaver. Well, when the censors saw that, they said, absolutely not. I mean, you have to remember that these are the days when if two people were married, they had to sleep in separate beds, and there had never been a bathroom shown on television. In fact, as late as the Brady Bunch, they don't have bathrooms on the Brady Bunch. But Leave It to Beaver is the very, very first show that ever had a bathroom. Now, the compromise that the writers made with the censors was that they only showed the top of the toilet tank.
All right, Captain Jack, back into your aquarium.
The big family shows at the time were all built around the Father Knows Best, Make Room for Daddy with Danny Thomas, and later like the Donna Reed show. The stars were in the title, and they were the parents. And even though Father Knows Best did a lot of wonderful stories about family life, still they were all based around Dad being the hero and how Dad responded to a problem rather than how the problem affected the younger members of the house.
The formula for the show, I believe, was it showed the world from a child's point of view. And what's good about that is a child has a sort of innocence that's not tainted, so you can actually look at the world from a neutral point of view, and you can be influenced any way you want, but it's a clear picture of the world. So I think that concept is really a valid concept. And then what happened was, I think they had Beaver, who was this child that was trying to figure out his way in life, and then he had Wally, who was not really a kid and not really an adult, but he was sort of the translator between the two.
You know, Dad, sometimes it must be tough having kids.
You know, Wally, that's the nicest thing you've said to me for a long time.
Joe and Bob really, truly felt that you cannot understand an issue from both a child and an adult point of view. They're two completely different things.
Hey, Dad.
What?
You know what she's trying to do to me?
Who's she?
Mom, she's trying to ruin my whole life.
Oh, she's doing nothing of the
Yes,
sort.
she is. She's trying to make me go to the dance with that Carolyn Cunningham, and I'm not going.
What, now, Wally?
What's all the shouting about?
That's what you did, Mom. What a dirty trick telling that Carolyn Cunningham I'd take her to the dance. Mom, she's Eddie's girl.
But I didn't know that, Wally.
Well, you could have asked me. I would have told you she was.
Wally, Mrs. Cunningham phoned and invited you, and your mother accepted for you, that's all.
Gosh, don't I have any rights?
Well, of course
Just because I'm a kid, you could have asked me before you practically get me engaged.
Well, Wally.
I'm not going, and that's all.
You know, it's very difficult to make a show starring kids because of the hours that they have to spend in school and the legal number of hours that they can actually perform.
They had such wonderful rules for the kids. They don't have those anymore, but not as strict. These boys had to be at the studio at 9 o'clock, went home at 5 o'clock, and boy, that welfare worker was standing there by the camera, and she didn't want those kids to stay a minute after 5. So it was a very regulated life for them. They had So many hours of school, so many hours of shooting.
But we'd spend time in school, and then when it was time to do whatever scene was the first scene scheduled for the day, we'd go in and we'd work and we'd do. So that would go on all day long, and we'd break for lunch at noon or 1.
It was a very, very tight schedule, and so a lot of times they would shoot the kids' long shots, they would shoot our close-ups, but then they would just skip Barbara and Hugh's close-ups, and they would have to go back at the end of the night after we had gone home at either 5 or 6, depending if we came in at 8 or 9, and then reshoot it. So they would then go to dinner, and they might be there till 9, 10 o'clock at night.
So instead of being able to listen to a child read a line, we were listening to some script girl saying, and so we went over to Eddie Haskell's house, and so it wasn't, that would have been nicer had we been able to do it another way, but it worked.
Well, fellows, how are things going at school?
All right, I guess. Yesterday, Angela Valentine ate library paste.
Ate library paste?
Yeah, right out of the jar.
Hey, Beav, isn't that Angela Valentine the one that's always showing the kids her extra toe?
Yeah, but everybody's used to seeing that. So now she eats library paste.
Well, that's one way to get attention.
Miss Landers says if she doesn't stop eating library paste, she's going to have to go see the principal.
I think that while working on Leave It to Beaver, we were very, very lucky. I think that the same kind of things that were going on today were going on then. It was that Joe Conley and Bob Mosier, as our producers, took such good care of us. Now, if you worked during the summer, you could work the child the whole time and they didn't have to go to school. But Conley and Mosier said, you know what? If we do that, Jerry and Tony really won't get a vacation, because if we're on hiatus, they'll have to go back to a regular school. It'll only be like a month or two, and then we'll be back in production. So it'd be very hard on them. So they actually switched their production schedule so that Tony and I could actually go and have a summer vacation.
No more pencils. No more books. No more tea. Hello, Miss Landers.
Well, Richard, you seem quite happy that Friday's the last day of school.
Well, you know how it is, Miss Landers.
I think I do. I was in the 4th grade once.
No fooling, Miss Landers?
That's right.
Gee, it's kind of hard to figure you getting yelled at by a teacher.
Well, I had my share of scolding.
Everybody went to school on the set, so that we had a classroom on the set, and that classroom rolled with us wherever we shot. If we were on the back lot, the classroom was there.
And we had to go to school for 3 hours.
And even though it wasn't the law that it had to be in 20-minute chunks, as it is now, they liked it to be. I mean, in the beginning, they'd even count 5-minute things, and it's really impossible to go to school that way. To come off the set, you're acting, you come back in, get a drink of water, go into the classroom, sit down, do 5 minutes, and get up and go. You really don't retain anything.
The producers were very cognizant of the fact that we had very, very different lives. We each had our own teacher, our own private tutor. Now, because it's pretty much a plum job, it pays a lot more than a regular teacher. They could get the very, very best teachers of the LA Unified School District. But we only went 3 hours a day. And so when I was going to school, of course, it was elementary school, so they would just hire a very, very excellent elementary school teacher. But Tony always wanted to be an artist. And so some of his teachers actually had a doctorate in art. You were always ahead of the curve of what kids were learning in a regular school because you had the best teacher, and she was teaching you one-on-one and knew exactly what you actually knew. You couldn't, when a teacher asked the question, there was only one person to answer that question. You couldn't hide behind anybody or put your head on the desk. You were the one that was going to be answering that question. And they would do other things for us, too. They put up a basketball court right on the sound stage, and we would have mammoth games with Hugh Beaumont. Hugh Beaumont always, instead of shooting one-handed, he would always shoot two-handed. Tony could jump like a gazelle. He'd be all over the backboard on all those rebounds. And every once in a while, I would get to play. But I'll tell you, those games were pretty intense for, especially when I was like probably 9 and 10 and 11. Those games were very, very intense. And to get in anybody's way, you could get mowed down real quick. You didn't want to you didn't want to just be standing there. You wanted to be in the game.
The back lot at Universal was like our playground, so it was a pretty amazing way to grow up. But, I mean, you'd be throwing the football around, and Rock Hudson would walk by, and he'd go out for a long one, and you'd toss it to him, and he'd throw it back, or Steve McQueen or Robert Mitchum. I remember Robert Mitchum once. they haul things around on these trailers and these steel-wheeled dolly things, and they hook them all together. So there's a big long line of them, and Mitchum's walking down, everybody's going to lunch, and he hops up on one of those things that had stopped for a stop sign or something, and he gets on the phone, and then he said to my mom, he said, "It's for you." And my mom thought that the phone was a payphone, and she hopped up on this thing until she realized that, it's interesting that to see these people, these kind of icons, goofing around in real life.
There were a lot of movie stars at Universal. Probably we had interactions with some of them. Tony and I were playing baseball one time, and I can't remember whether Tony was pitching or I was pitching, and the other one was hitting.
We hit a ball, and it hit Steve McQueen's. It was a Jaguar, a really, really great race car that he had. He used to race all the time.
All of a sudden, we went, uh-oh, we're in trouble now. And we all felt like running, but we figured there's no place to run. They're going to know we're the only kids on the lot.
He came over. We thought we were in big trouble when he came over. But he was understanding.
He was really a nice guy. He said, you guys are having a good time, and it's just an accident. But I'll tell you, we were really dreading that for a few minutes.
I think we left a note saying that we'd appreciate if he'd park it not in our ball field, which was between the sound stages.
One of the other people we had interaction with was Marlon Brando. He was working at the time and had the parking spot next to mine, or actually my mom's, because she drove me every day. But all the actors on shows had assigned parking all in a row. And he would roll in every day on a motorcycle. And I thought that was absolutely just the greatest thing. And of course, he had on, probably I guess from Wild Ones, a black leather jacket. And so I had to have a black leather jacket. Actually, I still have it in my closet, but it's only about that big, I guess. It's this little black leather jacket that I used to wear around, but I don't think I could ever measure up to Marlon Brando.
Once when Hugh Beaumont and I were having lunch at the commissary at Universal Studio, Cary Grant walked in, and everybody looked at him, and then suddenly Marlene Dietrich got up and met him in the middle of the commissary. Well, there wasn't a sound in that commissary. We were all just watching them as they embraced and said hello, and we were like this. And it was rather wonderful because they were two big favorites of mine.
You know, when I was working at the studio, and this is several years after I did The Trouble with Harry, Alfred Hitchcock was doing Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and for that he just did intros and outros where he would just come on and say a few funny things, and then the series was actually made with actors. But he would come in probably, maybe once a month to do 4 or 5 of them. And so one time I was sitting there, and this huge Rolls Royce rolled up, and it was chauffeur driven, and the window rolled down, and it was Alfred Hitchcock, and he'd go, "Oh, hello, Mr. Mathers, how are you today?" And that just blew me away because, see, everybody either called me Jerry or Beaver, but Mr. Mathers, that was my father. So Alfred Hitchcock was actually the first person that ever called me Mr. Mathers. What never ceases to astound me is all the different references to Leave It to Beaver on shows that I'll be watching. I was actually sitting with a very, very good friend of mine, Tom Cuddy, and he worked at the time for WABC radio in New York. And he, when I went to New York, he's a very nice man. We always go to a Broadway play. And he took me to see Neil Simon's Laughter on the 54th floor, I believe it is. And we were sitting there, and it was a great play, and it's all about early writers in the early 1950s. And all of a sudden, this guy, who was writing at the time in the play, a hit show goes, and then in 1957, a boy with an animal name came and wiped us all out, and television totally changed. And I was thinking to myself, here I am on the Golden Way in Broadway, watching a play, and somebody's talking about me from Leave It to Beaver, and it's Neil Simon. So it just never ceases to amaze me, all the different times that Leave It to Beaver comes up.
Beaver?
What, Mom?
I thought you were afraid of Mr. Donaldson.
Oh, that was last night, Mom.
It's all straightened out now, huh?
Oh, sure. I was coming in, and he asked me why I was so scared of him, and I told him.
You told him?
Oh, sure. After I explained to him, he said I could kiss his wife anytime I wanted.
Kiss his wife anytime. I think I better find out what this is all about, huh?
Just leave it. Just leave it.
One of the interesting things about being on Leave It to Beaver is that I've met people from all over the world. Now, Leave It to Beaver plays in, I think, 120-some countries in like 91 languages. But a lot of times I would be walking through the airport, and especially people from Asia would come up to me and go, "Oh, happy boy, it's the happy boy." And I'd say, "Well, yeah, I'm a pretty happy person." They go, "No, no, no, you are the happy boy." And I didn't know what they were talking about, and a lot of them only spoke their native tongue, and so they couldn't explain it to me. And then I found someone who was bilingual, and he told me that in some parts of Asia, since they don't have beavers, the show is not titled Leave It to Beaver. It's called The Happy Boy and His Family, and I am the happy boy. So that was always kind of interesting to me. That's why I was called the happy boy. Many people, especially in Asia, learn English by watching Leave It to Beaver. And the reason they do that is because there are so many dialects over there, a lot of times they'll subtitle it. And when people come over here, they think they're speaking English. Well, they are speaking English, but they're speaking a very colloquial English because Tony Dow and I were both Valley guys. And just like Valley Girls by Moon Zappa, when she sang about the way they talk, well, we were talking a Valley talk of the 1950s. So they'll come over and say, "You know what? I'd like a hunk of cake," and people might look at them a little strange, but they're talking Valley talk from the 50s.
The thing is, you got to love your fans because they're the reason that you're. If you don't have any fans, you're in big trouble. But I just found it. Some people are so wonderful, and so thoughtful, and have the nicest things to say, and then other people will cackle at you and yell, things, and I guess they're jealous of you or something, and other people are just they're ambivalent, I guess, or they don't they think they're the only people in the world, so they just sort of take your time and do whatever they want with it. So it's an interesting position to be in.
I like people, and I don't mind when people come up and talk to me about the show. If I think I don't look too hot, I might say, "Oh no, that's not me. She's much better looking than I am," or something. But most of the time we talk, and they're all nice.
I've had some really great fans, and one was a fella who sent me this book, this packet, and inside of this book were DVDs of the old Dr. Kildare that I'd done, and an old 11th Hour that I hadn't seen in years. I don't know how he got them, where he got them. It had 4 DVDs of Mr. Novak, and it had some old commercials that Jerry and I had done for the Automobile Club and for different things, and it was chock full of just amazing stuff that I don't know where he got it. I don't know if he got it off the internet or if he collected, but I was so appreciative of him. That's amazing that somebody would take that time. So I think that there are fans that are truly, they're interested in your well-being and they want to know what's going on, and it's really quite rewarding when you meet people like that.
Every time somebody tells me, "Oh, I learned so much from your show. Oh, your family was wonderful," I try to copy my family after your family, and then they say, "Why don't they have shows like that today?" And so you'll talk to somebody in the motion picture industry doing it, and they say, they'd never look at that today. And that may be true. Maybe it's too old-fashioned to make. They could bring it up to date like we did in the new Leave It to Beaver. But the kids are so used to shoot 'em up stuff, but I don't think that's awfully good. I think some of the things that we're teaching our children on television is pretty awful. Truly. I think it'd be nice to know there was a nice family existing, and I think that's why young families look at our show, because they don't mind their children seeing it, and it's still something to look up to and still emulate, and I think that's good.
One of the interesting things about Leave It to Beaver that no other show can brag about is that it started out as a television show in the golden age of television, obviously those 234 episodes in the 50s and 60s, and then it reran forever. Everybody was familiar with it. It's really hard to find somebody who hasn't seen it. Then in the early 80s, it became a 2-hour movie of the week,
You're always telling me I should figure out what I want to do. Well, I have. I want to bring my kids back to Mayfield so that they can grow up in a home full of love and understanding and a lot of good stuff in the icebox.
And Brian Levant, who was the head writer on Happy Days, was a huge Leave It to Beaver fan. And he has just finished Happy Days and was looking for a project, and he said, you know what, let's take this to the network. It was on CBS. It was called Still the Beaver. It was one of the top 10 movies of 1982. And then the people in Hollywood and New York said, well, if they're that popular, why don't we make this into a series? Kind of like Leave It to Beaver. We can have Jerry and Tony both have families and have kids and see how an updated version was.
It was one of the first series that was really successful on cable. We were on the Disney Channel, and we doubled their subscribership in a year. Then they canned us, and then we went on the Turner Channel, and we had the largest order in history at that particular time. I think it was 72 episodes or something like that.
We tried to get as many of the original characters for the new Leave It to Beaver as we could. So Ken Osmond, who played Eddie Haskell, Frank Banks, Barbara Billingsley. Now, Hugh Beaumont sadly passed away in 1982, actually about 4 or 5 months before we were actually going to do the show.
Bob Mosher, unfortunately, had died too young again. And Joe couldn't write any longer because he'd had a brain aneurysm, so he was alive and fine, but he just wasn't up to Joe Conley. So we had other writers, and we had a producer that absolutely, he was wonderful. His name is Brian Levant, and he had been a Beaver fan, and he's younger than Jerry is. And he wanted to do this, and he brought the show back.
The story of Still the Beaver was the only thing that was kind of left from my original concept in '75 was that he came home. But this time he came home divorced and out of work and was forced to return home and rebuild his life. And Wally was a successful attorney in Mayfield, and June Cleaver was a widow, kind of looking for something to do with their life. And Eddie was a sleazy contractor, and Lumpy, of course, worked for his father, which Beaver would soon join him at. And by the end of the show, Beaver's journey from being alone and kind of lost as a parent, and in the adult world, things had turned around to where he was a hopeful, confident father, that Wally and his wife were pregnant, that June would now raise a second generation of Cleaver boys, and everything looked pretty good.
I think Wally and Beaver have turned out exactly the way we thought they would. Oh, and Ward, I'm not worried about the Beaver anymore.
So I think that it's interesting that the show has not only been enjoyed by a number of generations, but it itself has gone through generations and been in a lot of different forms.
You know, Ward, looking through a scrapbook like that is just like watching the boys grow up before your eyes.
Yeah. And it was quite revealing watching Eddie Haskell progress from an insincere little kid to an insincere big one.
The pinnacle of my career and of any actor's career would be to be on a show like Leave It to Beaver, a show that was as popular 50 years later, if not more popular, than it was first run. How could that not be the pinnacle of an actor's career? And so to try to top it, you could be depressed forever. But I've just learned to enjoy it and to know that I've made people all over the world happy just by watching Leave It to Beaver.
Now as I'm older, so many of the jobs I get, even Airplane, I got because I'm June Cleaver, which is rather wonderful, because there aren't too many roles for older women. So it's great. I get to play one once in a while.
I have a doctor friend who was over a couple of days ago, and his little girl never liked the show because it was in black and white. But all of a sudden, he said, she loves that show. We watch it every day, and it's in black and white, doesn't matter. She gets the jokes. She knows what parts are funny and what parts are sad. It's just fascinating to me. So I think that it's probably not a bad thing for kids to see, because it certainly has had a good influence on a lot of people.
Seeing all my friends from Leave It to Beaver, it's just like a reunion, except we all fairly much live in the Los Angeles area, And a lot of times it'll be at very, very exciting things. It'll be at the 50th anniversary of ABC or different charity events. Barbara Billingsley and Tony Dow, Ken Osmond, Frank Banks, we're the real core group. We would be like the spokes of the wheel. But the thing is, it's a radio group, and that each one of those spokes goes out and knows some crew members or other people on the show. And so when we get together, we say, do you know that so-and-so got married? Do you know that so-and-so had a baby? Sadly, as I say, Leave It to Beaver was almost 50 years ago. October 4th of 1957 is when it premiered. So it's getting to the point where some of those people are passing on, and that's always sad. But it's always fun. It's like a very, very extended family.
Well, you know, we were really lucky because in that time in Hollywood, it was a much simpler, smoother time, and everybody got along great. I don't think there were any issues on the Beaver show that I can remember. A few minor skirmishes, maybe, but for the most part, you know, everybody's remained friends. I mean, Barbara and I go to dinner a couple times every month, or you know, once a month or something. Jerry and I get together. Ken and I will run into each other. Frank always shows up, even though nobody asks him to. and so it's you know, you hear these stories about, you know, Laverne and Shirley, they wouldn't talk to each other during the shooting of the show. I don't know how you can go to work and do that. We had none of that, and so the show has affected us, not only our careers, which affected our lives, but you know, it's affected us in terms of our friendships with people.
There's a still I have of Mosier and Connolly and Norman Tokar and Hugh Beaumont and Tony and Jerry sitting in the den of the Cleaver house, and it just looked like it was a rehearsal day, and they were sitting there solving a problem, and I used to look at that picture when I first got it before I did the series. I said, wow, they must have been really lucky, and then I can't tell you how many afternoons I would sit in that same chair in the den, and we'd be solving things, and it was really great to be part of that family, to be part of that tradition.
I can never remember a time when I didn't like being the Beaver. I know there are a lot of other child actors that have had very, very bad experiences, and I've talked with them. I think that probably the reason my experience was so good was because of my family life. As I say, my family wasn't living off the money from Leave It to Beaver, so there was absolutely no pressure that I had to go to work or that, you know, the family would starve. And that's what a lot of these kids, that's the kind of pressures they were put under.
I think I learned a lot about honesty and morality. You know, it sounds corny in today's age, but I mean, I think that the Cleavers were really good people, you know. Sure, Beaver got in trouble and he fibbed occasionally when he drilled a hole in the garage door or whatever, you know, the problem was. But I mean, for the most part, they were just real honest, hardworking people, and I think that that's a good pattern for people, and I think that kind of rubbed off on us kids that were working there.
It was wonderful to be able to work like this. And I used to lie in bed and think about what would I like to do. And I used to think of a television show that my boys would be proud of me and they could look at. And I used to plan this whole thing in my mind. Would you believe I've made the show for about 6 months thinking, gosh, I'm making the show I dreamed about. And there it was Beaver.
You know what? I think that Leave It to Beaver was the greatest boon to my life. I'm still reaping the benefits. I can go all over the world and people know me and I have friends. So yeah, I think that the choice would be, if I could do it over again right now, knowing what I know, would I? And I wouldn't even have to blink an eye. Yes, very definitely.